Hey guys. Hey Mars. It's a huge room, so we'll keep it nice and cozy. Welcome to Proficient, our location sponsor, our food sponsor, and our drink sponsor for this meetup. Proficient, we're a platinum partner, got 10 MVPs. If you're interested in learning more, you can talk to Rick, you can talk to myself. And obviously, you have this fabulous place, these 2 floors, third ward Milwaukee. So, Mike Reynolds has come from far and far to come talk to us about dependency injection and Sitecore. So, Mike, thank you for coming and take it away.
All right, thank you. I'm going to be presenting from the back of the room because I need my computer to show things. So I'm not being rude. I'll probably be facing this way, if that's all right. Some housekeeping things though. SUGCon EU is coming up. There's an early bird pricing going on right now until the end of February, so sign up for that as soon as you can if you're planning on going to Berlin. I recommend going to Berlin. It's Berlin. It's pretty cool. Never been myself, but I'm excited about it. I will be presenting there. A joint presentation with Camruz German. It's another Sitecore MVP who's in Ottawa. So it's going to be an epic presentation, and I recommend attending that. And mine won't be the only epic one, but Anyway, so we're here to talk about dependency injection on Sitecore 8.2 Plus. This is something that has come with Sitecore since version 8.2. It's really not something they invented. It came with the .NET Core stuff. It's actually stuff you can leverage right now. Some of the stuff exists in .NET 4.6 point whatever, but let's talk about it. So who am I? I'm just that guy right there. Credit goes to Mark Stiles for that animated GIF. He's got some mad design skills, I guess. If you need to reach me, you can find me on Twitter. I'm always on Twitter, but really I'm mostly on the community Slack. You can find me there, that's my handle. You can reach out to me on LinkedIn and all that good stuff. And there's my blog, even though I haven't blogged in 2 years. If you're not on the Sitecore Slack, I recommend getting on it. There's a link to it. You're gonna be sent to a form, fill it out. Please make sure you fill out the public profile link field properly, because this is something that has been a problem as of recently, where people are just putting a website URL to the company they work for, and well, we have no idea who you are. So please put maybe a LinkedIn profile link or something like that. There are 8 admins, I believe, that are constantly looking at these and reviewing them, and then they'll send you off an invite to the Slack. So definitely reach out, go look at it. There are about, I want to say 3,000 something, whatever amount of people from around the world on this thing. So if you have a burning Sitecore question, you can go on there and get it answered quickly. All right, so let's jump into this. So before I start, who's using dependency injection right now? Okay, can somebody tell me why you want to use it? What's the whole purpose of this? Without looking at the slides.
Unit tests. Unit testing.
Why do we unit test things?
So that we know when we break something. So we know that everything's not broken.
Okay, anything else?
Loose coupling between your layers.
You looked at the slide, didn't you?
I
Yes, that's why. We will tend to break less things when we loosely couple them. Why is that?
You can swap out implementations.
Well, yeah, but does that prevent things from being, I guess you can argue that things will, tend to not break as much if you swap it out with something else. And that's all about, well, it's all about solid. Everybody keeps hearing about solid, and everybody, some people don't even know what it means, but it's single responsibility principle. So a class should do one thing and one thing only, have one purpose. Object-oriented stuff, obviously, with the O. L is the Liskov substitution principle. Basically, an abstract class and a subclass that implements it should be interchangeable, but not going down. So doing a downcast is a bad thing, but going an upcast is fine. You're hiding implementation details from callers. the interface segregation principle. It's all about just enforcing interfaces and dependency inversion, which is basically really the Hollywood principle. Don't call us, we'll call you. It's kind of, I would say, ideating the whole IOC. That's what DI does. It kind of fulfills IOC. So the whole purpose is you're passing things around. You pass a service to another, let's say, service. That service will use that service because that service does one good thing. It'll get its stuff from that service and then do its thing and then pass it to its caller. As Joe said, it promotes loose coupling and high cohesion. Basically, you will break less things if you enforce interfaces because you can change the implementation details without the callers knowing. High cohesion means likes go with likes. So if you think about Helix, this is what it kind of does. You're putting things together in, let's say, feature layers and things like that. You're putting things that belong together. Of course, as you go and work on stuff that are Helix, or following the Helix principles, there is a lot of refactoring over time. So you might learn that, hey, this doesn't really belong in this feature. It actually belongs in this other feature, and you might be moving it around and things like that because things will change as we're developing new things. Anyways, I just went off on a big tangent because we're really focused on DI, but let's talk more about DI. So on Sitecore 8.2 Plus, which includes all the updates in 8.2 and 9, it uses the Microsoft's DI framework. It comes out of the box. You can actually change it. You're not stuck with it. You are stuck with it in the fact that it has to be a conforming container. What that means is it conforms to the interface that Microsoft gave us. It's the iService provider. You have to implement that in order to use a different container. So let's say you wanted to use dry IOC. Well, you can't. It's not a conforming container. It doesn't implement that interface. You can, in theory, make a wrapper to implement that interface. I actually did that a year ago as a proof of concept and experiment and spent all of Easter weekend just writing code nonstop, got it to work, and then I wanted to write blog posts about it, but decided not to because I was afraid somebody was going to put this in production and it wasn't really tested. It seems like it works, but I have no idea what the performance is. But anyways, as I said, as long as you implement iService provider, you can get away with it. This framework in particular lets you register your dependencies, aka service classes or services, in 3 different ways. Well, you can do a configurator. As you guys are probably familiar with, configurator is basically a class that maps things. It adds things to the container. You add it to the service collection. You say what the service type is, what the implementation type will be, and define its scope. And I'll go into scope a little bit more after this. You can register things through Sitecore configuration files. So you can have a patch include config to register things. I'm not really a huge fan on it. Configuration factory was great at the time, and it was kind of fulfilling DI way back when DI wasn't really a cool thing. But you can do it if you had to for whatever reason. I wouldn't recommend it unless that's your thing. And then you can do automatic controller registration. I'm going to show some stuff that Cam Figge had written and give you a link to his blog post to go have a read. I'll show you how to use it, but I'm not going to show you all the details. You can do service locator using this framework. Basically, that's where you call and don't inject into your classes. You call another class to go find the thing for you. I have it down there in that little black box. I usually try not to zoom in because I don't want people to do this, but there are cases where you have to do this. For instance, you might have to do service locator if you're doing Sitecore commands, because that's actually not in the whole DI framework. Maybe in the future it will be, but at the moment it's not. And I think that has to do with some legacy stuff and the way Sitecore built things. That was kind of put into place even way before Configuration Factory was a thing. They were using main util, which actually calls reflection util, and it was just using .NET reflection to create things, but you can't really set up properties and things like that from configuration. I can zoom in. Maybe go over here and show you. I don't know if you guys can see that. But if you had to, you can grab the current. So the bottom bit is Sitecore's particular stuff. And then the top part is for MVC controllers and things like that, or MVC bits. That service locator class actually lives in Sitecore.dependency injection in Sitecore kernel. And you can, you have to, I think, put a using statement at the top to use one of Microsoft's namespaces in order to be able to do, hey, get service by that particular type, because that's an extension method on the service provider interface. What's that?
Why don't you want to do that?
Well, there are many cases where you can just inject directly into the class. You just define that thing that lives in the container in your constructor, which I'm going to show that, and then it will just pass it to it. As long as your that class that is using those services is also in the container, it will wire all that up. Not to jump way too much into it, but behind the scenes is building a big tree structure of like dependencies, and things that have no dependencies will be at the bottom, and then all the way up like this, so that if you need to put something, let's say up here, it's going to figure all that stuff out for you. All right, let's have a look at some stuff. All right, so apologies because my Visual Studio license has expired as of today. So we'll have to use Notepad Plus to look at code. And unfortunately, this has gone blue. Any idea?
It is a pretty.
This is Notepad Plus Plus. The brand new version is blue.
Do that. Yeah.
This one?
Yeah. Let's see if that works.
Hey! All right. I don't know if I can zoom in on this thing. Can you guys see that? Is that too small? All right, so before I jump into code, let's make pretend you have some silly requirement where you have a number field in Sitecore and you have to round up to the 2 nearest decimal places. I'm not saying that, well, let's hope you never get something like that, because you know, I can think of like people say, hey, you can do that with money, but please don't do this with money figures. But, you know, let's say you had to do something like this. You had, whoop, sorry about that. Let's go back quickly.
That's session time out.
It gets me every time. Say if you had to do that, round it up to the next decimal place, or even, let's say, I don't know, round down. Let's make pretend you have a requirement like that. Well, how did I do that? Well, I'll show you. So, I created an interface for something that does rounding on numbers. Well, really doubles. You know, we're all good developers, right? We always create interfaces for our things, right? So I created this interface for this. That's so I can put it into the container. And then I created a class that just calls the math utility rounding method to round it to the 2 nearest decimal places. I don't recommend it hard code and things like that. I did that just for this. It's for pedagogical reasons only. But here we are. That's all it's doing, round to the 2 nearest decimal places. I just realized I actually am missing a piece of code that I need to also show. Just give me 1 second so I can go find it. And yes, I have lots of stuff in here. I say pipelines, save you, go into here. All right, so I basically am creating a Save UI pipeline processor where I'm gonna use that service. And so even for my pipeline processor, I also create an interface because I need to put that in the container to make it work. So if we go to the actual code for that pipeline processor, we can see that lots of stuff is happening. So here, I actually forgot to show you something which probably makes more sense. I'm gonna jump back real quick. So everybody's familiar with the show config page. Well, now we have a new page called show services config. So this is everything that lives in the container right now for Sitecore as from startup. Service type would be the interface type or base class. And the implementation type would be the actual real implementation that fulfills that service type or interface. And then over here to the right, we have the lifetime. So in this framework, there are 3 lifetimes you can use. You can use singleton, which means only one instance of that class will exist in the whole application lifecycle at any given point. There's also scoped, which means it will only live during a certain scope of code. And then you have transient, which means it's going to create a new instance every time that you want it. You can also use factory methods on here. So you can have, let's say, a service type, some interface where behind the scenes will run maybe a link expression or something that will create that object for you and return it. Unfortunately, you can't see what that looks like in this page, but you can see what the other implementation types are because they're real classes. But this could be anything. It could be, I don't know, a delegate pointing to something. To jump back, you'll see that this pipeline processor has a constructor, and I'm passing things to it. I'm passing services. This in particular is that service that I showed you, the rounder thingy. This guy here is something that lives out of the box from Sitecore. This is the standard values manager and the actual interface for it. So they put Sitecore, the whole product team, or maybe not the whole, whoever worked on this, created some base classes that served as interfaces for things in Sitecore out of the box. So before, this guy, the standard values manager, was a static class that lives somewhere in Sitecore.kernel. It still does, but behind the scenes it's actually using this, which if we go and look on that services page real quickly, that's this guy. And he's fulfilled by this concrete class here. So if you went to Sitecore.kernel and went and looked at that, that's where you find all the code for this class. And this really is just an abstract class. There might be logic in here as well, but for the most part, you can think of the left column as the interface. If I jump back, everybody's familiar with the log class, right? Log.error, log.info, all that good stuff. That's actually this now. Log.error, log.whatever will actually delegate to the method that's on here, which is another concrete class. This is an abstract class, but there's a concrete class that fulfills this. So if you actually, if you go look, there he is. Something called default log. The power of this is, if you don't like this logger, you can swap it out with your own. As long as you implement this service type over on the left, this base log abstract class, you can write your own stuff. And then it will just cascade everywhere throughout Sitecore that's using this. And since the static utility class is actually using this thing, it will probably go everywhere. You know, I don't know how it plays with the log4net stuff, but that's the idea. You can change it in one place and one place only, and then the callers have no idea. And that's what single responsibility is all about. Let's jump back. So I'm taking these guys and I'm storing them on properties in this class. This is probably a bad practice, using a property. I think when I did this, I was just not thinking. Should do like a private read-only member or something like that. Because really behind the scenes is when this gets compiled, these become methods, get and set. So there's just, additional overhead not needed. So just use private members. So if we go look at this, I'm going to iterate over every single item selected in the content tree, which is really only one. But Sitecore, when they built this with forward thinking, saying, hey, maybe one day we'll support multiple items selected. And the save item POCO, well, it's really not a POCO, but it's a class that kind of represents what the item will look like after we save it to the database. But this is what it looks like from the content editor before it gets dumped into the database. So here, I go and grab the item that's in the database right now, which is the content database. I just grab it by all these things here. So I need to get it by language ID version and all that good stuff. And then I just see if the item's standard values, because if it is, I probably don't want to do anything. Just exit out. We don't want to round numbers on standard values. I made up the requirement. So for the item, if it's not standard values, I iterate over all the fields, save fields, before it gets saved to the database. And then I just see if it's a number field, because if it is, and I do that by looking at its field type here. If it is a number field, and I actually can do a try parse on the value in it, then I'll apply that number round call to it. And then I do a toString to basically convert this into a string as a decimal, two nearest decimal places, because you have to do that with these kind of things on doubles. Anyways, that does that. It's going to go through its thing, and it's going to just pass it off to, I guess, one of the events and save it. So, I mean, the idea is not this logic, it's this stuff here, passing these things, because I didn't have to do a new on this class. Sitecore is doing all that for me, and it's going to pass these as, from the container somehow. Magically. I don't have to worry about anything. And then if we go and look, so how did I get that actually into the container? Well, I got to scroll. I actually did it by, I think I did it by through configuration. So I registered them using Sitecore configuration like this. This is the way I told you I don't recommend, but you can do it like this. I'm just showing you options. And here we go. We have lifetime, so you can. I made these. This one a singleton. This is actually the Save UI pipeline processor. And then up here we have, and so here's the service type. So that's the interface. Here's the concrete class that fulfills that. And I also did the service class. So the class that actually does the rounding part. And that's also a singleton. And then, as you would for any pipeline processor, you need to put that somewhere in the pipeline. And so I did that up here. Notice how I did resolve equals true? That's so Sitecore knows to use the DI framework. If you don't do that, you're going to get an exception. It's going to blow up, because configuration factory is going to try to create new, and it's going to expect a default constructor on the pipeline processor and go kaboom. I don't know how to resolve these things in the constructor.
You specify the type as the interface.
Yep, service type is interface. You can think of it as an interface. Could be a base class.
No, just on your pipeline.
Oh yeah, yeah. See that? Oh yeah, that's a good catch. I don't have to put the concrete class, because it knows what to go find in the container. It's going to go find that by looking it up in the container, and you can think of this as the container. It's going to go find that service. Is it that one? No, it's number rounder. So there we go, this guy here. And it's like, oh, it's actually one of these things. Oh, we already have it. It created the singleton somewhere already. And it's just going to pass it to the pipeline processor. That's that. Is there any questions on this stuff?
How many more services are coming? That's obviously not everything in Sitecore, right? So
No.
what's the roadmap look like to be completely inclusive in the container?
I have no idea.
Okay.
Maybe I can call him out. You can ask Kern. I'm not sure. I haven't heard much from Kern lately, but I think Kern might have led the team that did this work. They did a good job. A lot of work went into this. Like look at all these things. I mean, it looks like there's not a lot, but there is a lot here. And think about all the testing that had to go into this, and things had to still work.
Prior to this, nothing was marked as virtual. Nothing was really ready for anything. It was pretty, well, it was anything but ready for any kind of dependency injection. So this is a huge improvement, a lifesaver for that.
It's massive.
This is new 8.2?
Yeah, 8.2 and then all the way up. So it doesn't go down. So you can't do this in 8.1. You have to do some other magical things. None of these exist in 8.1. I looked. What's that?
A lot of work for that release.
Yeah. There was a lot more in that dot release. So this is just one of many things that went into that. But yeah, a lot of work definitely went into this to make it work. Yeah, I have no idea how many man hours this took, but I can imagine a lot. Anyways.
Does it itself use configuration, injection by configuration, or is it done in the actual code itself? So the concrete's in.
If I remember right, most of it is using service locator. I don't know if I remember them where they are actually passing things to constructors. Because it's probably because they couldn't get it done in time. Maybe in the future they'll do that. There could be places where they're doing it properly. I don't know. I haven't looked at everything, but the stuff I've seen was using service locator. But that doesn't mean you have to do that. I mean, you can totally just inject it into your stuff.
Service locator uses the configuration.
No, service locator is that bit of code that I showed you here. So if I go and show, oops. So this is this thing over here. That's this guy right here. So service locator, that's a static utility class that has an interface on it. This guy is an interface service provider because that's going to represent the container. And there's a method on that, get service, and then you can pass in the type like this. You can actually pass in the type here, like using type of or whatever. This is a nice extension method that Microsoft provides. I don't remember what the namespace is. It might be on Cam's blog. I'll give you a link to that. But that's probably that's what I've seen in a lot of the decompiled code. Is that, can you bleep that up? You know, I'm not supposed to decompile code, right? But anyways, yeah.
But where would you set the concrete class of the service collection?
This?
In the configuration?
Yeah, this has to go into the configurator. It doesn't have to go in configuration. So what I showed you was just one example. I'm going to show you another example with configurators. So that's, you know, this was just one way of doing it, but you don't have to do it like that. I'm going to jump into the next thing, which is actually something probably more practical for us. Everybody loves Sitecore tokens, right? Everybody loves when you add a new token to standard values on things that already have items. You love that, don't you? Well, we all know that this just bleeds through into existing items, and, well, what do you do about it? Well, imagine if you had a way to do something like that, or you can do, I don't know, it's a date, ID, parent, something like that. Parents are obviously not one of those things, but I always forget what tokens are there. Yeah, so that could be this could be a real thing. I'm going to show you how I did that. So, like before, we have a service type that we're defining for our service. So the classes of this type will check to see if an item has tokens on it, and it will also just expand tokens on the item, regardless. You pass it to it, it'll expand them if they exist, and do nothing if they don't. Here's a real implementation class for this interface. As you can see, I hard-coded this list of tokens in here. Do as I say, not as I do. I don't recommend hard-coding anything. You can definitely inject that using, in other ways you can use, actually Configuration Factory doesn't really play well with the DI stuff sometimes, but I'm sure you can find a way not to hard-code it as I did. The reason why I had to do this is because the existing tokens that you can use, you can't access them in code easily. They're hidden away. They actually live on this class. And this class does not live in the container. At least I never saw it in that show services config page. So if I just jump in here real quickly, I'm just passing the logger class and putting that on a property, which really should be a private member, but whatever. Master variables replacer class. So this has been around for a long time. It's a class that expands tokens on items. Pass it an item, it does stuff. You can grab that from, it actually is in one of the Sitecore settings. As a matter of fact, if you go look for it, I'll show you. There he is. So this is just a setting where it just looks it up and just will create an instance, probably using reflection or something like that. So you can use this factory class is the Sitecore configuration factory class. and it has a method that will give you that master variable to replace your class. I'm actually setting this on a property here. I have a method here. I made it virtual just to be nice to somebody if they don't like that and they can use their own. The method to see if it has tokens just does a read on all the fields. So I want to get even those coming from standard values, iterate over all of them, iterate over that list. It's probably not the most performant code, but if you can think of a better way, please let me know. If it contains a token, return true. Otherwise, we didn't find anything, return false. This method here will expand tokens on an item. So I put the item in editing mode. I pass it to the master variables replace a class method to expand tokens. And then I end the edit. If there's an exception, I cancel edit, and then I log the exception into the Sitecore log using the base log. I don't know if I opened up the, sure. So these tokens live inside of this class, but you can't access them. They're actually hard coded in there too.
You can expand those extra fields. Those are
Yeah.
fields that are already there.
Yeah. And the reason why I'm doing it like this is, for this example, was to show some performant code. So basically, I'll check, hey, do we have any tokens? No, don't expand it. Because this master variables replacer class will iterate over all the fields and try to expand it regardless, if I remember right. It's been a while since I opened that up, but yeah, it's definitely something like that. I think I got to jump back here because I didn't open that up that either. But so I'm using a Save UI pipeline processor to do this. Just like the other one, I created an interface for it. It's going to take in a save args. All Save UI pipeline processors require this in order to work. And then here, we're doing a similar type of thing. We're injecting some services into the constructor. This token expander was that service class I just showed you. And you guys are familiar with the standard values manager. Here's that class or service type that will do that stuff for you. I just put them on properties, which really should be private members. And then we have a process method. And so we're going to iterate over all items selected in the content tree, which is only one. Get the item from the content database. If it's standard values or it doesn't have any tokens, ignore it. So you're just going to iterate only once and then exit. Otherwise, expand tokens. And as you know, expanding the tokens will just pass it to the master variables replacer class. How did I wire this into the container? Well, I got to scroll back here. And I did that through a configurator. Woo! So here's a class where you can map things. Instead of using Sitecore configuration, you can do it in a configurator, as you guys are probably used to in the way you do DI right now. This is a particular one that Sitecore wants you to implement. This is an interface that Sitecore gives you. You must define a configure method that passes in its iService collection. So this is really just a list of service descriptors, which they have a bunch of, it's a class that has a bunch of properties on it, so you can define the service type, the implementation type, factory method, scope, lifetime scope and all that good stuff. So, and some other things that I'm not thinking of. But here I'm just adding my service class as a singleton, and then the pipeline processor also is a singleton in the container. And so it's really important that you put your pipeline processors in the container, or if you're trying to map things through the constructor, it won't work. It will just explode. You will get a 500 error, a yellow screen of death. However, you have to register your configurator in Sitecore configuration. That also goes into the services node, and you define it as a configurator. And here's the type of that class right here. And then Sitecore knows it's there, and it will build up the service collection and pass it to all of them, because it actually grabs them all at startup, passes the thing, you add to it, and then it does its magic. Returns an IaaS service provider somewhere. As all pipeline processors, you have to register that in configuration as well. As you can see, I have resolve equals true, or none of this will work. I'm also only using the interface here because it should just go look it up and they'll find it. And that's that. Any questions on any of that? All right. I did talk about controller, Auto Magic controller service registration. So Cam Figgy wrote some really useful code to do this for you. Here's the blog post. If you get a chance, go read about it. I know this highlighting doesn't look good, but if you just do a search for, I guess, Cam Figgy and Sitecore DI, you'll find this. That's how I found it, at least when I was looking for it again. What this lets you do is you can register your MVC controllers in a current assembly. You can actually you can say which assemblies you want to grab them from, and I think there might even be support for API controllers as well. I think there was a bug in that, and Jerman called it out, and I think Cam Figgy fixed it or something like that. There is code that does that. I'm not going to go through this. Cam wrote this code, Cam Figgy. Definitely go read his blog post about this stuff, but you can do magical stuff registering your controllers. Your controllers won't get registered. You have to put them in the container. If you don't do it this way, you have to put them in your configurator or register them maybe in configuration. I've never actually tried to do that in configuration, but
This way they're automatically there.
yeah, it will go find them. It will register them. I'll be honest, I'm not a fan of this kind of stuff. I like to force developers to put them in here, but that's me, because I'm a tyrant and mean. So
When he's trying to inject all the controllers via DI, aren't you normally kind of telling, when you say you have a controller rendering, you're telling Sitecore the type and the method to call? Or is this for
no, so for the controller, it's just going to register the controller class. You need to put that in there so that when you pass a service to your controller, it knows to wire it in, to wire everything together.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No.
I was going to say, this is pretty typical when you're using a container like AutoFac or something like that.
Sure.
That your controllers are automatically going in and just making command. So this really mimics that same feel.
Right. If you guys looked at Habitat, the demo site of Helix, it does stuff like this. So it will, I think it does stuff like this, if I remember right. It's not doing this particular thing. It might be now, I'm not sure. But I know that it had another, before this was out, this DI framework, it was using its own DI stuff, and it was registering controllers magically. If I remember right, it's been a while. I don't remember it being so good where you can have wildcards though, but everybody knows not to take from Habitat, right? It's only an example website to show you how to do things in Helix. You never want to use that code in production. I also alluded to the fact that you can change your container. So another smarter guy than me, named Dmitry Shunchekov in the Ukraine, wrote a blog post on how to do that. In his example, he's using AutoFact. And the reason why he's using AutoFact is because it's actually a conforming container. So he doesn't have to write a lot of code to make that work. When I did the dry IOC a year ago, I had to write a crap ton of code. It took me like 36 hours nonstop. I did go to the restroom a few times. But if you look at this, here's his blog post, by the way. Go read that. He has a lot more information about this. But a lot of this is coming from the AutoFact namespaces. You have a container builder. It's going to populate the service collection into the container. And you can register your controllers this way. I'm not sure about API controllers and MVC controllers, if it knows the difference. I have no idea. And then it builds a container, and then it returns the IaaS service provider magically. The point of this is not to use AutoFact. It's to show you that you can swap this out. You're not stuck with what Microsoft gives you. You can use whatever you want. Either you do the work or somebody else did the work for you and you just use their work. Now, if I go and I want to show you something. The service provider builder lives in configuration. So you could swap it out right here. So I'm going to do that with Dimitri's in a second. But one thing to note, you can't use Configuration Factory magic to inject into this. I've tried. It throws an exception because it puts a lock on the configuration reading operation. It makes sense though, because the actual Configuration Factory lives in the container. So how can you inject into this thing if it doesn't have the service yet? So you can make that argument. Actually, Nick made that argument, I think, on Twitter when I asked about it. But still could use the, never mind. So let's go make that change real quickly. Unfortunately, I got out of the directory I wanted to be in. I want to go here, configurator, sorry. It's one of the challenges without having Visual Studio open. It's doing all this stuff like this. So I have this guy here. I'm going to swap out the service provider builder's type with Dimitri's. And I'm going to just turn this back on. If I reload this, it's going to take it a second. Here's that one, the AutoFact one. Everything that I just did should still work. So I'm just going to reload this and try it. That rounds up. Template name, maybe? Maybe not. Anyways, it still works. Using a totally different container. It's seamless because everything's just plug and play using service types. Any questions on that?
Yeah. Any reasons? I mean, obviously they're using the Microsoft container for a reason. Is there a really good reason to swap it out? I know devs have their preference of containers and the whole bit, right? Outside of that, is there any advantage to wiring up a completely different container at this point?
This is an interesting discussion because there are numbers out there, and I hear different figures everywhere I look. Like some people will say that stuff that Microsoft provides is pretty fast. It's all about speed, by the way. And then others are saying, well, dry IOC, and I'm not going to name names, is faster. There's actually some kind of like blog post out there that's updated. Yeah, and it shows that dry IOC is so fast that it's even faster than when you do new on a constructor of a class. I don't know how that's possible, but, and then I call it that into question. But it would be all about, hey, let's say your website's super slow and it's, you've gone through, am I using Sitecore caching properly? Am I using this? Am I doing that? Maybe I'm using Inject for this thing and it's super slow. Or, maybe this Microsoft container is slow. I mean, I think the crowd is out on that. Nobody really knows. I know that people have used this in production out of the box and it's fine. So, I mean, my suggestion would be is if, I don't know, for some reason it looks like it's slow and people might corroborate on that idea that it's slow, maybe you want to swap it out. But right now, a lot of people are just using it because it doesn't seem like it's a big deal.
Well, I would think
So,
it's easier when you come time to upgrade and do everything else. You don't have to worry about the customer ever.
yeah, exactly. So, I mean, the options are there. I mean, you can do it if you feel you have to do that. But, I mean, you probably want to make sure you cross all T's and dot all I's before you do that. You want to really make sure that I need to swap this out because it's too slow. But, you need to have proof. All right, let's go back. So there's a lot more stuff out there that you should go read up on. Go read about Microsoft's dependency injection framework. They wrote some stuff about it. I read this a while ago. I forget what was on there, but it was some good information. There are blog posts out there. You know, some of these have been around for a couple of years. Cam Figge obviously wrote, he's not an MVP anymore. That's how old this slide is. But he wrote his blog post and he even talks about the controller registration stuff. And he also kind of expands on things I probably didn't cover. Dmitry Shinchekov, you can go read about his AutoFact thing here. Richard Seal has written some stuff about this. He also wrote something on, I don't know if it was Stack Overflow or the Stack Exchange, showing how to swap this stuff out with Simple Injector. If you can Google that, go find it. It's pretty cool looking. I'm not saying you should do that, but it will show you how to do more, examples of swapping out the container. And then actually, Sarah obviously has written something on this. He actually did a blog post showing benchmark numbers for different containers. But I call into question some of the results. But I hope you're not listening, actually. But anyways, you never heard of him. Any questions? No questions. All right. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Mike.